use cases are. So
Mm-hmm.
depends on risk averseness of the company and like risk, I want to say like acceptance. So for
Okay.
example, if you're a local community bank, there are going to
Mm-hmm.
be some use cases for you to apply Gen AI, but probably not with no code because there's some regulations and some security measures
Exactly.
that you have to have in place in
Mm-hmm.
order to implement it. So you have to kind of move things into the cloud, and there's some requirements for you to have to in order to navigate your regulatory space. But there are companies who are, let's say, marketing agency, content copywriters, copywriting agencies, and things like that, where the risk is not as high. You
Mm-hmm.
can totally apply AI in your organization. So, and another example, another regulatory example would be like if you're in the medical space, right? Like in I recently was talking to someone who was working in the like a physician in the emergency room, and then they run a consultancy within a larger hospital. Well, it's
Okay.
hard to convince them to use a no code solution and the LLMs or out of the box tools because again they're operating in a highly regulated space. But it is much easier. Again, like there's so many different use cases where you can use AI to streamline operations kind of behind the
Mm-hmm.
scenes,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to look up information, brainstorm. So even in those highly regulated industries, you can use like ChatGPT, web form types of solutions in order to like upload specific documentation with that don't include API, like IP.
Mm-hmm.
But I do
Totally.
think that there's like a significant amount of efficiencies that can be gained with the tools that are accessible now.
So, hi everybody. Those who are listening, this is Anish. I've been doing podcast for like probably I would say like 6 to 7 months, but due to some personal reasons, like had to put a stop to my podcast. And now like after things has been like back to normal, I thought I would again get back to my podcast journey. And now I've been like completely changed my niche. So before I used to talk a lot about freelancing, social media, content creation, but once there was a point like where I had a client like who asked me to do some sort of workflow automation in SaaS product. So that's when I started learning more about SaaS, and then slowly, like as you might know, like the so-called the powerful app ChatGPT came into picture, and everybody started getting into AI. Then even I thought like okay, probably AI is like really interesting. Let me also get into it, and that's when even I also started getting into AI. And now I thought like okay, it's probably the right time that I start my podcast with AI and probably the SaaS products itself. And so once like I've been thinking like who is the one that I have to start bringing as a guest, and that's when I came to know about Svetlana. So she is like completely into AI. She has done a lot of work previously, so she's been a product manager and all those things. So now currently like she is founder of, I think it's called Spark Change, right, which gives a lot of AI solution to businesses. So we have a lot to talk with Svetlana. So really thank you
Yeah.
so much for accepting my invitation and being on my show. So how do you feel?
Yeah, glad to be here. Thank you for having
Okay,
me.
awesome. Thank you. Yeah. So let's get started. So from my perspective, and I think currently like every industry, I would say is being impacted by AI. Not even like we cannot exactly say it's been like on a larger scale, but I can see like every industry you take, there's some at least a point of impact that's been done because of AI. So like what do you think about AI in general on the whole? Like you take, I don't want you to get like specific in the industry, but on the whole, like how do you think the AI is changing the world as of now?
Yeah, so maybe a little bit more about the trends. So I think AI is not a new term, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that hopefully folks kind of realize that AI has been around. It's been for decades,
Yeah.
and it's just recently become more of a hype word, and people are getting paying more attention to it. They're trying to understand what it is, but the way I think some of the best tools utilize AI is they're built in a much more invisible way. And then there's some statistics that floats around that folks prior to ChatGPT, I think I would say
Mm-hmm.
somewhere between 60 to 70% of people across the globe have been at some point in their life interacting with artificial intelligence technology without realizing it. So,
Mm-hmm.
and the if you've ever used Google, if you've ever used Amazon, if you've ever used eBay, or had used any apps on your phone, pretty much. Like if you interacted with your Android or an iPhone, chances are you've interacted with artificial intelligence. Um, and so I think that the hype with generative AI and kind of sparked a different kind of interest and swayed a lot of attention from investing and kind of across the industry to start looking to adopt it. And I think, and there's two, I want to say like there's two different sides of the coin. There's people who are confused what it
Mm-hmm.
is. So like they
Mm-hmm.
don't really understand it. And then there's people who, or companies who are embracing AI, and I feel like there are two sides of the spectrum. There's not much middle right now. So it's either people who are confused and not sure how to adopt it, or there's people who you hear about, the Microsoft, the Google, the big companies like IBM who are embracing kind of some of this, technology and are leveraging in their business, and they're reaping a lot of rewards because, again, they have the know-how. They know how this technology works. They've utilized it for a really long time. I would include, banks, healthcare institutions. Again, a lot of people who have deeper pockets, who have been looking
Mm-hmm.
into the space for a while. Now it's just accelerating. I do think that generative AI on its own is very transformative, but even that hasn't been like a new concept in the last year. Some of the products that I've led in the
Mm-hmm.
development, so that transformer idea of the technology has been around since 2017. And so there's some tools that we've built on top of transformers, not OpenAI's models, but using transformers in back in 2021. So again, to some companies who have been on the earlier kind of learning journey to adopt it are embracing the technology and they're reaping more rewards, but they've already kind of had a head start with their learning curve. But then
Mm-hmm.
there's again like a lot of people who are confused, I want to say, like they don't know what the technology is because they've never had to hear as much about AI. They've never kind of knew how to apply it into their business, and maybe the barrier to adopt was much higher. So I think before Gen AI, it was much harder to bring an ML technology, transformer technology. You would need to have a development team, but it's so much
Mm-hmm.
easier now, with the kind of development of no code tools, with the democratization of some of these Gen AI models, right, being open source. It's becoming much easier, but still, I feel like that there's still a gap with businesses as to, okay, well, it's great that it's open source, but what do I use it for? Right? Like there's still a
Exactly.
gap as
And
to like understanding what it is and how to apply it.
okay, so like now I wanted to stop you here and like ask you a question over here.
Yeah,
So like
please.
you have mentioned that obviously like you take Google, Microsoft, since they have like big pockets, like they've been early in terms of AI. So now you've also mentioned that before the production of this generative AI, like it was like very difficult for even small business or even large business to do because like they need a lot of development in hand. But now since you said that we have a lot of this low code platforms and all those things, so does this actually mean that even let's say even a small company has an equal, I would say like equal opportunity as the big company in order to adapt AI and kind of use it in their business, or like what do you think about it?
The regular, I think probably you'd expect the answer of it depends, and I think it really depends on what the use cases are. So
Mm-hmm.
it depends on risk averseness of the company and like risk, I want to say, like acceptance. So for
Okay.
example, if you're a local community bank, there are going to
Mm-hmm.
be some use cases for you to apply Gen AI, but probably not with no code because there's some regulations and some security
Exactly.
measures that you have to have in place in
Mm-hmm.
order to implement it. So you have to kind of move things into the cloud, and there's some requirements for you to have to in order to navigate your regulatory space. But there are companies who are, let's say, marketing agency, content copywriters, copywriting agencies, and things like that, where the risk is not as high. You
Mm-hmm.
can totally apply AI in your organization. So, and another example, another regulatory example would be like if you're in the medical space, right? Like in I recently was talking to someone who was working in the like a physician in the emergency room, and then they run a consultancy within a larger hospital. Well, it's
Okay.
hard to convince them to use a no code solution and the LLMs or out of the box tools because again they're operating in a highly regulated space. But it is much easier. Again, like there's so many different use cases where you can use AI to streamline operations kind of behind the
Mm-hmm.
scenes.
Mm-hmm.
to be able to look up information, brainstorm. So even in those highly regulated industries, you can use like ChatGPT, web form types of solutions in order to like upload specific documentation with that don't include API, like IP.
Mm-hmm.
But I do
Totally.
think that there's like a significant amount of efficiencies that can be gained with the tools that are accessible now. And some of them, again, like depends on the use case, depends on the types of vertical you're operating, the way that I'm kind of thinking about that I think about AI and how it could be applied in the business, which is where I help kind of organizations with,
Mm-hmm.
is that typically a business, and this applies to anyone that's small to the enterprises, what they want to
Okay.
do is they want to survive in the market. They want to make sure that they continue to
Exactly.
have growth in their business.
True.
And so, how do
Totally.
you do that? You every business model, most mature businesses, I would say, like some folks who are even on the smaller end, should have a business model. So this is kind of the idea of how I provide value to my customers. And then there's an operating model which kind of dictates how you do that. So and the beauty of AI is that it can help with both. So on the business model front is like, how can I bring more value to my customers through AI? How can I bring more products, maybe enhanced features to whatever I'm already providing? But then how can I do that at a lesser amount of cost? So how can I gain operational efficiencies in my business? How can I have like let my knowledge workers in my business have access to these tools so that they
Mm-hmm.
can do copywriting faster, they can brainstorm ideas faster? How can they draft documents significantly faster? Because the impact there is on the operating model. So if kind
Mm-hmm.
of the simple equation is that top line growth equals business model, and this is
Mm-hmm.
how you're providing and what value you're providing to the customer, so you want that to grow, and you want to do that at the least amount of cost, so minus operating expenses. And AI can help with both increase basically the business value in the business, but then
Okay.
decrease operating expenses. And again, it really depends on the business type and regulatory space, and how you can what opportunities exist in that business. It is quite, I would say, like one on one. But has it become easier for companies, small companies, to adopt AI? Yes. How they adopt it, I think it depends.
Depends. Okay, fine. And when we like, when I specifically asked, like you said, it's like completely depends on the use cases, right? So recently, like I've
Hmm.
been going through an article, right? So that like
Hmm.
specifically talks about those AI use cases. So what from my understanding, like what I have known is that many business, like specifically small business, like what do they think is like in if I want to get into AI, it's like I have to build something very big, like let's say be it an AI agent or like or a chatbot, like that's the ultimate use case is what they think. But after reading that article, I just came across this concept called atomic use cases, which is like
Hmm.
small, very small use cases that kind of chunk up together, and then you have like very big use case, right? So like what
Hmm.
from my experience, I have seen that most people, I mean, like most small businesses are not ready to adapt AI because they think that they have to do something big. That's the real use case, what they
Hmm.
think. So I, from my experience, like after learning that article, what is that thing that I have learned is that so right from automating a lead generation, till
Hmm.
writing like probably the best email copy using ChatGPT or Claude or like whatever that model might be. So even that actual AI use case starts from that specific part, like all those small things that actually make up to the bigger one is what I think. So what do you, like? Do you have anything have to say with this atomic AI use cases and then doing it all together, which brings to the bigger one?
Yeah. I think there's multiple ways to look at that, and then I'll kind of adapt it to different size of companies. And so
Mm-hmm.
when you look at a process, and so every
Okay.
process, let's say for a smaller business, let's say you said lead generation. So as part
Mm-hmm.
of a sales process, you have a workflow. So as a
Exactly.
salesperson, when I come in, I do this, and this task. So you
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't revamp the whole entire process with AI, because
Exactly.
AI does one. They're called one trick ponies. I think Andrew Ng kind of calls them, because
Mm-hmm.
they're great at doing one specific task. So this is why
Okay.
ChatGPT GPTs are so popular now, because you kind of train them or you program them to do one specific thing. So like
Yeah,
write me a blog
and
post article, like help
yeah,
me
and may I know
brainstorm
like
these
what is
things.
that name again? Like you specifically mentioned a term, right? It's like 1 point. Can I know the name again so that our audience gets it right? So, like you mentioned 1 point.
Um,
Is it a specific term that
um,
you enough use in
so
AI?
it's to take a look at the process, or what do you mean?
Yeah, like yes,
Sorry,
like you
I'm
said
like,
that that's okay. Like that's totally fine. Like when you said that Andrew kind of mentioned a concept, right? It's 1 point solution or
okay.
something. That's
They're
yeah.
It's
So that's
so Andrew Ng basically called it one trick ponies. It's not a I
okay.
want to say like a technical term or anything like that, but
Okay,
it's meant to
understood.
exemplify what
Hmm.
at what state of the technology AI truly is. So they're really
Exactly,
good
understood.
at doing one specific task.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Totally.
and so same thing with machine learning models, deep learning models. They're optimized to do one specific task. Recommendations engines are
Hmm.
trained to recommend different products for a specific industry. So all of the AI solutions at this state of AI, which is artificial narrow intelligence, they are trained to do one specific task. So, and that's how you should look at your
Understood.
process and look across your workflow. And I think what you said is right. So let's just tackle one piece of the workflow. So the biggest pain point, the bottleneck in our business is actually content writing, or maybe
Hmm.
finding leads. So
Leads.
how
Okay.
about we scrape the internet and we automate that particular task? How about
Exactly.
we look, okay, content writing is another one, or brainstorming ideas. You look at that particular task and then you automate it or you enhance it with AI.
Hmm.
And then I think when at a smaller scale, that's how it works. When you're kind of in the bigger size companies, just to give you an idea for how we've applied at that type of concept in a significantly larger organization, is that they look at AI as capabilities. And that's
Okay.
how I teach my in my trainings how
Hmm.
to look at AI. So you build these capabilities that perform specific tasks, but ultimately, AI is still a point solution. So the biggest differentiator is integrating these tools into the workflow. So they should be
Hmm.
seamless into the workflow.
Hmm.
So sometimes, in order to enable the end-to-end workflow, you will have multiple capabilities that you build on top of each other, or like they're coordinated via some orchestration agent in order to
Understood.
go from one step all the way to the end. And you can't do that with one single like machine learning solution or deep learning
Exactly.
solution. So you have to develop multiple capabilities that you stitch together in order to provide that end-to-end user value.
Understood. Totally. I mean,
Yeah, but it's
so yeah.
totally aligned.
Exactly. So, I mean, like, now I think, that's like, okay, for now, like, I wanted to get, I want to like know more about your, perspective. Okay. I mean, like your personal life. So the thing is like, you've been this product manager and all those things, right? Like, I don't want to get deep into it, but like, may I know, like, how did you like
Mm-hmm.
specifically get into AI? And you mentioned that you've been doing this training, like, I think right from 2021, if I'm not wrong, like right before this AI, chat GPT and all, like, became mainstream. So like you started getting into AI, right? So like, what was your so is there any specific point that you got any awareness about AI, or were you like kind of a tech person right from the beginning? So like, how did the AI happen in your life?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I've been in digital product development for
Hmm.
over a decade, for quite
Okay,
some
awesome.
time.
Hmm.
And when I switched my roles into one of kind of my more recent engagements, I kind of stumbled into AI. I want to say by accident, but almost like I was forced into it because
Okay.
I was one of the few people who were new to the team, and I was
Hmm.
the most, I want to say, like senior, most experienced product manager. And one thing that I think where I do well and I perform well, and I think where my strength is being able to navigate through ambiguity. And
Okay,
so
awesome.
one of the things that I was just basically voluntold to work on a project that utilizes AI, and to add additional pressure on top of it, there was a direct ask from the CEO of the organization, which is again
Hmm.
quite a sizable organization. And then I was given a development team in order
Okay.
to execute it. So I knew that I couldn't waste resources. There was high stakes, so the initiative couldn't potentially fail. So couldn't fail. So
Mm-hmm.
I needed to figure out like how to provide direction, how to learn AI in order to be an effective leader to the team. And so I kind of developed this, I knew that I needed to learn quickly in order
Mm-hmm.
to be able to provide direction to the team because I
Okay.
didn't have formal AI education. I'm not a data scientist, I'm not an ML engineer, but I needed to know enough in order to
Exactly.
navigate the space and to be able to problem solve and also lead the team. So, one thing that I emphasize a lot in kind of the things that I post on LinkedIn for anyone who's interested in kind of learning more is that I don't believe that AI is any different than any other approaches to problem solving. And I'll kind of
Okay.
expand on that a little bit. So when
Sure.
I
Please.
kind of dove into the AI space,
Mm-hmm.
my tool belt basically increased. So when I look at an approach or I look at a problem, not every problem should be solved with AI. Sometimes you can use automation, and not all automations actually use AI. So things like
Exactly.
Zapier, if you've ever used make.com,
Yes. No,
are
I am a
not
big fan of those too.
AI automations. Yeah, those are really great, but hopefully people recognize that there is a difference between rule-based approaches versus AI approaches, and so you have to kind of recognize what is the right tool for the problem that you're trying to solve. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I deal with AI, I kind of approach it. Okay, does this work? Does this new tool of AI work in kind of my framework of how I apply it to problem solving? And it does. But I needed to know enough in order to, again, navigate the space. At the time, we were building a natural language processing, again, using transformers, module. We used
Mm-hmm.
some enhanced data science techniques and a recommendation engine. So it was a complex project, but I needed to learn it enough and quickly. And we were able to build the system, the proof of concept within 3 months, which in healthcare
Awesome.
space, highly regulated spaces, is just like unheard of. But then we were able to scale the solution across the enterprise within a year.
Okay.
So, which kind of again speaks to my ability to learn. And again, I didn't need to become a data scientist in order to navigate the space. And then since
Understood.
that, we were able to scale to additional products. I've been able to apply same framework to create strategies, product strategies using AI solutions for lots of other products across the organization. And again, I think there's
Okay.
an added complexity that it being in a regulated space, but then also that
Mm-hmm.
these are enterprise wide solutions. And then
Okay.
since then,
Awesome.
I think I've been able to advise and help companies to scale their solutions, right? Like sometimes, and I think the biggest problem that I'm seeing right now in
Mm-hmm.
the space is that people are trying to make a quick buck in a way by building these like very light software layers on top of existing Gen AI solutions, basically large language models. And then they stumble into scaling problem because not every
Exactly.
no code plus LLM solution can truly scale to an enterprise scale type of solution. So that's what I tend to help with.
Mm-hmm.
I think my superpower is being able to navigate through the ambiguity regardless of what industry it is, because ultimately
Awesome.
I treat AI as a tool rather
Mm-hmm.
than like this big unknown black box. So you just need to know how to
Okay.
apply it.
Fine. I think so. This brings me to my next question. Like, so you are the founder of the Spark Change,
Yeah.
right? So, may I know, like, what exactly, what's the
Yes.
service or the solution that you provide to businesses?
Yeah. So we offer training. So basically,
Mm-hmm.
free of charge, explaining how AI works. But yeah, my target audience are executives. So
Okay.
and the reason why, I kind of operate at a higher level, and what you'll notice in my posts on LinkedIn, is that for my target audience and the way that I've operated, kind of being a problem solver for a lot of these issues, is that I didn't need to be in the weeds of the terminology in order to bring value to the organization. So
Okay.
the way I approach this training is what's the minimal amount of information does the executive need to know about AI in order to find opportunities within their business that can, again, going back to my initial comment, is like how can I bring more value into my business, and then how can I do that at a least amount of cost. So what
Okay.
automations can I introduce, process automations, and then what new products or product enhancements can I introduce into my business. So we do some trainings where I kind of share basically a different mental a framework for how to approach basically AI without
Okay.
getting inundated in the technical jargon. And then you would do basically an opportunity map. So depending again on the maturity of the organization, how big or small the organization is, there's different anchor points for where we actually look at the business, and then we almost like do an inventory of different processes that they have, and then we start to apply
Okay.
AI capabilities to these different processes, and then we prioritize. So depending on where the biggest bottlenecks or where the biggest value can be created in the business, we focus on that
Mm-hmm.
particular solution or basically process or product, and then we expand it further. So like what does it mean? Because it is proprietary to their own business, so we want to make sure that we kind of have a good understanding. We apply AI on top of it, and then once we have a good handle, we do prototyping. And this is kind of standard to product management, is that before you actually invest into building something full scale, you want to de-risk
Mm-hmm.
it. You want to make sure that it
Exactly.
first of all works, but then it's something that can truly bring value. So instead of investing tens and hundreds and millions of dollars into building this huge big solution, can we build something in a week or two that's
Mm-hmm.
truly like a proof of concept? We hand it over to the business, let them try it to see like, hey, this
Okay.
is probably not all the bells and whistles of this could be, but is this enough for you to see the value of this? And then they basically commit to then building it full scale. So it is, we come in and start with the education. So if you don't have really a good grasp and you perceive AI as a black
Mm-hmm.
box, we kind of open up that black box for you. We go into your business, we do an inventory, look across your organization. We can look across the business vertical. We can look at a specific process or product that you want to enhance. Maybe a company sometimes may have a single product that they're creating most of their revenues. Maybe it's like just the one
Okay.
core product, but they want to enhance it with AI. Maybe a
Awesome.
startup could be a good example of that, who I've
Mm-hmm.
consulted in the past. And they build it in a rule-based way, but they're like, okay, I think that there's an opportunity for us to do more if we had AI. And so we look at their product and again do proof of concept, and then you scale it to a full solution. So yeah, it starts with education and ends with delivery of
Complete
a
delivery.
functional
Okay.
solution.
And I think,
Yeah.
so one of your, I would say, biggest advantages, like since you've been already, a product manager, now, kind of this, all this, prototyping and actually, scaling it to the enterprise level is kind of easier for you, right? Like I wouldn't say exactly easier, but you have those strategies in your hand wherein like how, let's say you're building a product, like how to take that roadmap, like you have a proper roadmap, right? Like as you mentioned that you need to like,
Yeah.
demystify all those risks and all those things. And then if you go to the, let's say enterprise level, that's totally fine. Instead of, not actual instead of like not having a product like directly if you, pour in millions of dollars and then if the product doesn't work then it's of like no use, right? Like since you have those experience it's
Yeah.
an upper edge for you, right?
Yeah, I think it just comes from having a lot of experience building different types of tools. So again, as I
Mm-hmm.
mentioned, I don't think that AI changes things from a product management standpoint. The same
Understood.
that there's some nuances to how you manage projects on the ground with the development teams, how you
Mm-hmm.
actually do change management, for example, how you educate people about around your products, but the way you actually build it, some of the same standard processes that you would implement. So in the beginning, when I build
Mm-hmm.
up my kind of strategy for the product, some of the same
Okay.
things in traditional product management still apply. You still need to do industry analysis, like an evaluation. You still need to look at how other users solve, or how other companies solve that particular similar problem, maybe across similar or maybe disparate industries. You look at you do some again like user studies to make sure that
Mm-hmm.
you really understand kind of the user needs, the problems that you're trying to solve. You work with different stakeholders to define the problem. So like none of that kind of changes. You still kind of apply it. What changes is how you actually problem solve.
Okay.
The and whether this particular problem that you're trying to solve, could it be solved with an a rule-based traditional automation? Does it have to have an AI automation? Does it have to be an AI product? Do we need to build, and you kind of navigate the build versus buy type of kind of I want to say like framework? So do
Mm-hmm.
you need to build a proprietary model, or do you build on top of an existing, or can you use an off-the-shelf tool? in
Okay.
order to solve that particular problem. So you do a lot of that evaluation. Same thing. I think the things that do change is again how you manage the development on the ground. So how you actually perceive development, how you demonstrate ROI behind the value that's invested, how you actually do change management, because there if anytime that you call out artificial intelligence in any of your products, especially in bigger organizations, it scares the heck out of people.
Okay.
So you want to make sure that you do some change management, you over communicate the value, and then you over communicate how it works. You break down concepts and into something that is again tangible. I think this is where my practice has come in, because again, people who
Okay.
we rolled this out to don't understand regressions or deep learning, or the difference between computer vision and Gen AI vision, right? Like, so you kind of have to just kind of elevate those concepts so that you communicate the value, you communicate how it works without getting
Exactly.
inundating those users with the jargon. But does it give me any advantages? I think it's helpful to again like to have another tool under my belt and know how to use it,
Exactly.
because I
Totally.
don't believe that every product needs to be enhanced with AI. Hmm.
Exactly. I mean, I think that's where most of the business can, again, like they think they're kind of, missing out on something because, like, as you mentioned, it's not that I totally understand that, AI is going to be like really big and all those things, but that doesn't mean that you have to incorporate AI into every workflow that you have, right? So only which is necessary that can be kind of incorporated, right? So that's totally fine. And, now I wanted to ask you, regarding I would say the biggest company as of now in terms of AI, which is OpenAI, right? So like
Yeah.
since you've been building in AI space, like you've been here for so many years, like I want to ask you, so right after like ChatGPT came, like we had GPT 3.5 and now GPT 4.0 and all those things. Like we are expecting GPT 5. So which even Sam Altman says that when you use GPT 5, so GPT 4 is gonna look something like kind of a little boy or something like that. They think that its capability is gonna be like really higher, but each and every other day, like if a new model
Hmm.
comes, like everybody claim that this is better than GPT 3.5, this is better than GPT 4, like every other model that comes out, right? So they keep claiming that it's better than like every other chatbots out there. But over time, like we can, like we as users, after working with a lot of use cases, we will exactly we can figure out like which is best for like what, like let's say if you ask me, like even if you use GPT 4.0 and if you use Claude 3 model, right, I would say Claude 3 is much more better in terms of writing copy and all those things, because that has a bit more, I would say, creativity, like when you give a proper prompt, right? So that's what like in my experience has been. So on this whole, like what do you think about like how do you think these companies are going forward? Like do you think OpenAI is like really way ahead when it comes to other products and other models, or like how does it work? Because every company says that we are better than GPT-0 when GPT-4 when they build a new model. So what do you think about it? Like where is OpenAI is actually standing when you compare it with other AI companies out there, especially Google
Yeah.
is what I would say, because Google have been coming out, they've been building out a lot of products, they give a lot of expectations, but they don't keep up with the promises, right? Like recently we have a lot of issues with this Gemini and all those things. So like how do you think these companies are playing out?
Yeah. I think it's so many different angles that I could take this.
Okay.
But basically, if you're kind of starting with kind of your comment with, there's so many models being released and so many different versions, and then there's so much
Exactly.
competition that's happening. And so
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
there's different threads there. So it's not always about the biggest. And so I think ChatGPT, and I've seen some visuals like GPT-5 versus GPT-4 is going to be significantly larger model. Well,
Exactly.
the thing is like it's not always about what the biggest model is, but the most nuanced, or the one that suits your use case. The other thing that after a year of adopting some of these AI models in the enterprises and other organizations, what um, companies are starting to realize is how expensive it is to inference these large models. So it's not
Understood.
always the biggest models is probably like the best for your use case. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
a smaller, significantly smaller models, maybe like not in the billions of parameters, but maybe in the millions of parameters that can
Millions of
actually
parameters.
satisfy the specific use case you're trying to solve. It may be, a specifically trained model or enhanced open source model could actually cut down on your inference costs and then still satisfy the output that you're looking for. So it's not always, again, that you have, the biggest one, like, oh, we're using ChatGPT or GPT-5. Um, look at the costs, like project out the costs of what it's going to be. So
Totally.
if you have multiple, let's say 100 employees
Mm-hmm.
inferencing it multiple times, you can multiply that by the number of inferences, tokens, and X, Y, and Z, and then you can project out those
Exactly.
costs. Does it make
Exactly.
sense for you to pay that amount? Can you create and generate more value than what those inferences are? So it's not always bigger is always better.
Mm-hmm.
So there are going to be nuanced use cases where that probably makes sense for you to adopt such a model. But again, I
Okay.
would say it's probably a smaller pool. Where organizations are really focusing is on cheaper models. And the cheapers are typically smaller. There's Mixtral, there's um, Grok. There's other ones that
Yeah.
use mixture of experts that are basically some from a performance standpoint, they operate close to ChatGPT 4 and sometimes maybe even less, but that's okay. I think because for your specific use case,
Use cases.
it's maybe fine for you not to have the best because you still have human in the loop, hopefully, to be able to add or enhance the output. And so these mixtures of experts. So you do have multiple, let's say eight. I think Mixtral uses eight, and so you
Okay.
have these eight different agents that are working together, and the one that's specific to your scenario gets activated, and
Mm-hmm.
it's very nuanced and it's trained for your specific use cases. I would
Okay.
say like not always are these big models also well suited for specific industries. So, for example, like OpenAI's neither GPT-4, GPT-3, or GPT-5, I would probably assume will not be well suited for healthcare. And I know that for a fact because we've I've worked in that space, and
Okay.
so it could do some things really well, but if you need it to be very nuanced to healthcare, bottom line is that it wasn't specifically trained on medical documentation for
Okay.
to perform well in very nuanced use cases. So again, if you're looking at your process and
Mm-hmm.
let's say and then you break it out into these smaller components, when you look at one particular aspect of that process, it is so nuanced. You need something that's very specialized. That's why you actually would build something that's custom or enhanced, like or improved, because you need that thing to do one thing specifically and do it well. Well, you can't use a general purpose model to
Mm-hmm.
and expect for it
Understand.
to perform well in this very, very nuanced use case. So I would say
Okay.
like yes, I think that that's where I think the big companies are headed. And then I think you are ultimately where I think the industry is headed with them. And I do believe so that a lot of these models will become commoditized, and that's where not where um, the businesses will see the value. Yes, you're going to see inferences, you're going to see
Mm-hmm.
end users use ChatGPT, and actually, what's interesting is that the GPT-4 models that are open access to basically anyone to subscribe to, right? Like you don't need to be like a developer to actually use it.
Exactly.
OpenAI has not seen growth in their subscribers in the last year. So they've had like this big spike in subscribers from
Yes.
December through April, but it's been quite flattened. Their growth has flattened in the last
True.
year. So they're realizing that that's not where their core business is. It's
Mm-hmm.
actually in the corporate. Um, and I'll kind of, I do think that then at the same time you have competition rising in that time frame. So now you have Google, you have Microsoft, you have IBM, and like all of these other players that are coming and starting to compete against each other. So when you have a lot of supply of these models and they're performing approximately at the same level, I do think that they're going to be commoditized in the very near future. They're still going to be gaining some costs, but that's not where I think a lot of these companies are making money. It's not on the
Mm-hmm.
inference, it's actually on providing end to end services. So, still, if you have a model, let's say the weak point of OpenAI and why I think they strategically speaking, where I think they're going to be heading
Okay.
next is becoming a cloud provider, is because if you have a model, you still need a
Okay.
cloud provider. You need those NVIDIA chips in order to inference or use those models, right? One thing that OpenAI does not have is that they're not a cloud provider. But guess what
Mm-hmm.
Google does with their Gemini? Microsoft has their own kind of like now coming up with their own models. They're a cloud
Yes.
provider and then they have their own models.
Their
And
models.
so they expand into those spaces. Well, OpenAI, again, like they can capture the market of these smaller agencies who are building like no code solutions and things like that. But the enterprises are already onboarded with Microsofts and the Googles. And so the only way for them for OpenAI to tap into those bigger markets, who I would see the target users of those OpenAI like GPT-5 models are, they need to become a cloud provider. And I do think
Okay.
that if they're really strategic enough about it, I think that they would start to explore either strategically partnering with other cloud providers or becoming growing their company into that space.
Okay. And when you say this partnership with cloud providers, like we already know that Microsoft, being their biggest investor, and they have this partnership, right? So do you think that's not enough, or like what do they like? Should you do you think that they have to also have partnership with other cloud providers, or like may I know like some details about that?
Um, well, it's for so the reason why I would say like Microsoft has partnered with OpenAI earlier on was because they didn't have their own models to offer to their customers, right? So like if you were
Okay.
a cloud customer of Microsoft and then people were looking for Gen AI solution, everyone was hearing Gen AI, Gen AI, Gen
Jenna.
AI. They would come to Microsoft and they say like, "Hey, what Gen AI models do you have?" And they're like, "Oh shoot, we need to go find we need to go find a partner to like bring these solutions." So I think they partnered with OpenAI earlier on because there was demand for those models from their
Okay.
existing client base.
Mm-hmm.
Um, with Google, and I don't believe Google partners. I think they make GPT-4 available through them, but they're not a strategic partner, like a growth partner with
Yes.
OpenAI, is because they're developing their own. They
Mm-hmm.
initially launched Bard, now they have Gemini, and then now they have a whole suite of their own
Exactly.
models. And so they're like, we don't need you. OpenAI, like we have our own customers, we have our own proprietary models that we're going to release to our customers. Like you are our
Mm-hmm.
competition, so why let your competition into your cloud and then offer
Exactly.
your model and basically steal revenue from OpenAI? Like so, I do think that Microsoft strategically kind of partnered with OpenAI is because to offer it earlier on to their client base.
Okay.
But now I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they're starting to release and develop their own models, which I think over time they'll start to promote their own models over time and then promote OpenAI's less. Because again, like
Okay.
why would I promote OpenAI's models if I have my own? I can
So
capitalize
true.
on all of those earnings
So true.
if I don't give that business over to OpenAI. So that's why I think that,
Okay.
as these companies grow and they
Mm-hmm.
become more and more advanced in the Gen AI space, they develop these models. They have a wider range of services available to their businesses. I don't know if GPT OpenAI is still going to have like the best or going to have a competitive standing amongst these
Mm-hmm.
big giants. Although I've
Okay.
had even on my podcast, I've recently had a disagreement, but because my co-host in my podcast, thinks like, oh well, it's still like the best model. I'm like, it's just a matter of time
Exactly.
until these other
So true.
models get as good.
Exactly.
So
So
I
true.
mean, they could maybe in a year or two we'll see, but I think it's a matter of time until others catch on.
Exactly. And even I actually remember once even
Yeah.
Satya Nadella was actually telling that even though we have a strategic and a very good partnership with OpenAI, it doesn't mean that OpenAI is not our competitor. He himself has told this. So this basically means that, like as you said that at that point of time, actually, and one more thing, like I got a very good insight over. Like I never thought about it. Like I was thinking that I mean, like Microsoft was kind of a strategic investment probably in order to get that revenue. But I swear, like I didn't know. Like it's the first time, like after you tell me, like I got the insight stating that since they didn't have the Gen AI solution, they had to, partner with OpenAI. But now, like after you say and like I'm able to stitch all the pieces together. Like now I'm able to understand like why did he himself tell that even though we are strategic partners, like it doesn't mean that OpenAI is not a competitor. So that I still I and I'm like now I'm able to understand like why exactly they detail that. So I think that was like really good. Like I
Yeah, and
got
I
a lot
think
of
I think in
insights.
addition to that, and I think it's capturing some of that attention, right? OpenAI had
Hmm.
a lot of attention being built at that time too, and so they
Okay.
wanted to probably capture that attention to say like, hey, now Microsoft has this, and so and OpenAI being like top of like um, the hype curve, and they
Mm-hmm.
wanted to also, I want to say, like in addition to that, capitalize on some of that attention that was building up in the industry. And then so it was strategic, so they invested in them to make sense to bring them into the environment. But I do think that over time you'll
Mm-hmm.
see less and less demand and promotion of OpenAI's products. But then
Okay.
that's also why they're continuing to revamp, because they want to make sure, like, hey, we're delivering above and beyond with our multimodal solutions than anything else you have. So, which
Mm-hmm.
is like, oh yeah, you're right. I think that there's definitely a lot of use cases that are going to continue on, but again, you don't have to have, and like the way I kind of explained it for your use cases, like, would it be better for you, let's say, to go from A to B? So let's say
Mm-hmm.
you're standing at a bridge,
Okay.
and you're like, I have two methods of getting from A to B, and then this is
Mm-hmm.
equivalent to solving a problem. So I can get on my bike and I can
Okay.
bike over that bridge, so a motorcycle, and get from A to B.
Okay.
Or I could get on a cruise ship
Mm-hmm.
and wait for it to start up, and I can go from A to B and cross that river. So which path would you take, and which one will cost less for you to go from A to B?
Right. Understood. Totally.
Right? The motorcycle, right? Like, and sometimes like you don't need the biggest and the better, and like that's equivalent of like the amount of cost for you to inference a smaller model is equivalent to spending like an increment of cost it would take to start up and inference an entire like this giant cruise ship of a model when you just need like one specific output.
Probably.
It may
Yeah.
not
Like
even need all of the bells and whistles that model comes with.
true.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the only thing is like you need to go from point A to
So,
point
yeah.
B. Like it doesn't mean that you need to completely carry forward that whole big thing, right? So that's the point over here. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I get a lot of insight.
Yeah.
So now I would as I think we are kind of ending this podcast, so we're coming to this last part. So uh, with
Yeah.
AI being, getting into mainstream, like everybody want to learn about AI, but the biggest problem is that like there's literally tons of information out there, and moreover, like tons of new concepts, new technologies. Like every day it keeps coming, right? So like if a person, let's
Yeah.
say, we can keep it in terms of let's keep it for like, non-technical stuff, because even you're like in your even in your LinkedIn profile, you have like specifically mentioned that I help non-techies, to leverage AI and things like that. So let's keep for non-techies, like if they wanted to get into AI. So like, what do you think is the first step? Like, how should they navigate? Like, do you have any sort of, a roadmap kind of thing? Like, how do you tell it to other people like who are not
Yeah.
into tech?
Yeah, I would say like look at some of the posts that I have, which will kind of capture the way I kind of pursue or the way I
Mm-hmm.
explain AI.
Okay.
Because again, I elevate these concepts to a higher level because I do believe that it's about mental models and how you approach. Like you just need to grasp enough about the AI, how AI works, in order for you to
Mm-hmm.
apply that knowledge to anything that's being released. And that's kind of basically my approach. Like instead of understanding, hey, you can use a recommendation engine for what? I think it's ultimately what it does. And then there's a guide that I have on my page that basically says AI predicts. So in
Okay.
that case, it's not about understanding how the recommendation engine works or what the technology is behind the scenes. Are they using regression? Are they using, I don't know, k-means, like some other approach in order to like get to that recommendation? What you need to understand is like, okay, what's the problem that they're trying to solve, and then what function does AI perform in that state? So
Understood.
AI are ultimately the way I kind of look at it. And so just try to apply this. And I think this is the mental framework when you
Okay.
look and study different AI is that all artificial intelligence, regardless, and if you give me an example, I'll tell you exactly why that is. They're pattern finders. And then what they find patterns in is data. And so when you look at machine learning, they're looking at patterns and data. They're trying to
Exactly.
surface features in that data in order to predict the future outcome. So they're looking at patterns and then they create these mathematical formulas behind the scenes in order to apply that for future use cases. So they are pattern finders in order to predict a specific outcome. And let's say you use generative AI. So large
Mm-hmm.
language models, they look at
Mm-hmm.
data that they've been trained on, and what
Okay.
they actually do is they predict the next word. And
Mm-hmm.
so, but they use the mathematical. That's why you have like this understanding of parameters, which is similar to like in machine learning, you have these features. They look at these different nuances in language, which comes from volumes of text that they've been trained on. They identify a pattern in the language in order to predict the next word in the sentence. And so approach
Exactly.
it as you're kind of learning these new tools, like try to apply that type of framework and say like, well, Svetlana said that this is the case. Like, why is this the case? And try to understand it. And I think it's going to start to make sense because all there's a lot of math behind the scenes. And so, how do they get from this, from training in order to convert it into something that's mathematical? Again, they look at patterns and data that they're trained on. They develop this mathematical formula in order to predict some sort of outcome. And these
Outcome.
natural language processing types of models do that in a different way. So, and look at capabilities. There's again like a guide that I've posted with tangible use cases for how companies are applying it, but look at
Mm-hmm.
capabilities. So there's AI predicts or AI forecasts, there's AI that analyzes. So again, they looks at patterns in data and tries to surface insights that are on top of that data. So it looks at existing data and then tries to surface those, specific insights. When you look at even computer vision,
Mm-hmm.
if you look at earlier use cases, computer vision is trained on what? Data. And so
Data.
you give them different scenarios. Like the common one that you've probably heard a lot about is like you show pictures of cats and dogs. If you
Mm-hmm.
don't show a model a specific, like any use case scenarios, and then you show them, let's say, a lion, and be like, I have no idea what that is, or you haven't trained them on any of those things. But if you show them a lion and has been trained on cats, it's like, oh, well, these facial features look like a cat, so very likely that this is probably a cat.
Probably cat.
But it's also like when you apply these, and it doesn't really matter what source you use. I would skip all of the historical lessons on AI and how it emerged because I don't think it's going to help you understand what
Exactly.
AI is. But
Exactly.
look at different frameworks, understand what AI actually does, not how it's even trained. I don't think that's really useful, but try to
Very true.
surface yourself at a higher level. If you understand the big pictures, it gets easier to apply that big picture to the details. So when you start to grasp the bigger concepts and then you dive into courses that are teaching you about machine learning, natural language processing, how transformers work, you'd be like, oh, okay, that's how they do what they do. Like that's how they're performing this forecasting or this prediction function. Oh, gotcha. And that's what's behind the scenes. Oh, I got it. So like you have to kind of understand that hey, this is a car before you dive into and like try to figure out how like the engine works or how to actually drive it. Like you need to understand like okay, what do I have to deal with? So grasp that concept, and I think once you even have those that high level picture, it's
Mm-hmm.
easier to apply it. Again, learning the details, but also trying to apply it to news and trends. So
Understood.
things that are happening in the market, you're like, oh, okay, well, that's what it does. And okay, and I see, and I have some use cases in my mind for how it could actually work. Okay, and here are the implications. So I don't believe, and I think this is where a lot of the courses get it wrong, is that they spend 50 to 60% of the course teaching you how AI came about and how it works, but they don't teach enough about how to apply it. And that's where I
Exactly.
think you should focus on first. Go into those use cases, apply the framework that I just provided to you, gain kind of that practice in your mind, and then go backwards, learn how it works, and then learn how AI came to be.
Okay, I mean that's like really good. Like even though like I was not like exactly used your framework. Like when I started getting into AI, like the first thing what I did is I just try to understand the basics of AI. Like what does it actually do? Like as you said, like rather than going and checking all this algorithm papers and all those things, because like I'm not a like I don't come from a technology background, and I'm like pretty sure that even if I read it, neither it's going to give me any uses of it, like or no nor it's going to make me understand like what is it all about. So like first like what I just had a basic understanding like how does artificial or like generative AI actually works. And then what I started doing is like I started using the models like which are like pretty easy and like free, right? Most of the things are like free, we can make use of it. So I started doing that. And when I wanted to go to the next level, like using platforms like apart from their like like let's say I want to use ChatGPT but not in its interface, like let's say I want to use it in some other place. So that's when I make use of this Zapier and make all those things. So what I do is like I use their API. I try to stitch like two different apps and probably to segregate my emails or send email replies, all those things. So like my thing was that like as you said, I will always look at the use cases, see like what it can actually do it, and then we can get into the use like how can we build it. And then like probably as you say, like if at all if it's necessary, I don't think it's necessary at all, but if at all it's necessary, probably we can go back to the history, or like how does it work, like unless and until you are, unless and until you want to become an, let's say, algorithm engineer or something like that, like I don't think it's necessary for you to learn exactly how the algorithms are written and all, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you just need to, and the way I kind of position it is like you just need to understand the capabilities of AI,
Mm-hmm.
what it
Mm-hmm.
actually does, rather than how it works, what makes it up. Like, if in order for you to drive a car, for example, right? Like, do you
Exactly.
need to understand how the engine works? Do you even, like, I don't know if you
No,
drive a car or a motorcycle or whatever. I have not spent a single day in my life in order for me to use like for use my car. I never spent an hour of understanding how the engine works
that's
because
not
you don't really
necessary at
need
all.
to. You just need to
Exactly.
know what can I use it for? I can use it to go to a store. I can use it to go to like go pick up my kids. I don't know. Something else. You just need to understand the functions of AI and what it performs. And there's different nuances, right? Like there's a motorcycle, there's a
Mm-hmm.
SUV, there's a pickup truck, there's something else. These different things are optimized for specific things, right? And that's how you should perceive AI, is that AI are these different vehicles in order to solve your problems. Like the example that I gave you, to go from A to B over a bridge, sometimes it
Exactly.
makes better sense to use one tool versus something else. And so that this is kind of where I would say experts are people who have a lot of more experience in this, but like to in order to kind of start getting those themes built in your head, yeah, it's practice, it's understanding the patterns of how AI is applied, get a lot of examples and try to
Mm-hmm.
experiment with it. Like, what can it be used
Totally.
for? But I wouldn't
Okay.
waste your time spending understanding the history or the different nuances of how AI is trained if this is not something that you plan to do. So if you're not
Okay.
aspiring to be a data scientist, ML engineer, or data engineer, forget it.
Exactly, totally. And I think with that we are end, like we have come to this end. So it is like really, really great talking to you. Like I've got a lot of insights to be frank. Like I've like all this, this OpenAI and Microsoft, strategic partnership, like the actual reason behind it, and a lot of these things. So it is like really great talking to you once again. Like thank you so much for accepting invitation and being on my show, and
Yeah.
sharing your insights. So any last words that
Yeah.
you want to
Happy
add
to be
here?
here. Yeah, I think if you enjoyed kind of how I explain things, I always invite people to follow me on LinkedIn. That's where
Hmm.
I post most of my content. Probably I do have a podcast, and I share
Awesome.
it with a co-host. And yeah, just check out. And I think if you want to learn AI at the way I kind of explain it, you'll see a lot of resources on my page. You can go back in history and kind of catch up. But yeah, if you have any questions, drop me a line. I'm always happy to help.
Sure. And to all the listeners like who are listening, like I'll be, putting out like all Svetlana's, resources and all like and her LinkedIn profile and podcast, like everything in my description. Like probably you can have a look at it, and you can also, like DM. Like in fact, like I have just, connected with her. Like like since like I'm talking more about AI now, like my field was kind of filled with AI, like in LinkedIn, and that's when I came across Svetlana. Like I just, DM'd asking like if you can be my guest. So similarly, like if you have any specific doubts, I think probably you can message her as well. Like if she's like really free, probably she's gonna help you out. So
Yeah, no, I'm always happy to help. Again, like
ah,
I didn't have any reservations. I'm always happy to spread the word about AI, explain how it works if it could benefit others. So yeah, it was a no-brainer to come on this podcast with you.
awesome. So with that, let's just end this. So I've just
Thank
stopped